Last night was Manchester United's first game since the INEOS group, which Sir Jim Ratcliffe is the chairman of, agreed to buy a 25% stake for around about $1.03 billion. The group have taken control of all of the club's football operations, including the men's and women's teams and the academy as well. We've got further details on this because it's quite interesting to sort of hear, because a lot of people will say, well, they've only bought 25%, the Glazers have still got 75%, so what control does that give them? It still means the Glazers are in charge. But that's not true, is it?
No, and I think when you get into the detail, and I've been sent a document this morning that's 241 pages long that outlines this deal in the most minute detail. It's interesting, first and foremost, that it was the Glazer family who actually suggested to INEOS and Sir Jim Ratcliffe that they wanted them to take sporting control. It wasn't necessarily a demand from Ratcliffe coming in, although I'm sure that was on his agenda anyway. But as you said in the commentary last night, that's basically the mission of failure, isn't it, from the Glazers over the last decade or so, in particular since Sir Alex Ferguson and David Gill left the football club, that they feel that they haven't really done a good enough job on the football side, so they want somebody else to come in and make those big decisions. And in the document, it states clearly, actually, that the Glazers can't hire or fire a director of football or a manager without INEOS having final approval. They can't sign any players or sell any players without INEOS having final approval. It's the same when it comes to dishing out new contracts. And I mentioned Wan-Bissaka, him and Victor Lindelof, I think, are in a bit of limbo when it comes to their long-term futures at the football club. There's details also about the stadium redevelopment, that £300 million is going to be committed by Sir Jim Ratcliffe to sprucing up Old Trafford as the first part of a long-term plan to completely redevelop the ground.
Is that completely guaranteed to be used on the stadium, or is there a suggestion that it might be used for day-to-day operations?
I think the bulk of it is going to be used on the stadium, and that is detailed in the document. Doesn't really reference the training ground, which I think also is in need of a bit of a redevelopment, or the academy.
They have already started doing little bits of that.
Yeah, but that needs bringing up to scratch as well. No mention of the historic debt as part of this deal, which obviously is a big issue for a lot of Manchester United fans.
Over £6 billion, Crook, including the debt. So it's valued at £6 billion. I'm not sure that they'll be worried too much about carrying the debt.
And the other interesting thing is that if the Glazers decide to sell their majority shareholding, Sir Jim Ratcliffe can't stop that unless he buys it himself. He doesn't have the power to veto the Glazers selling their shares to a third party. He gets first refusal.
That's key, though, isn't it?
Yes, and one would imagine that that's his plan, but I think we need to hear from the man himself. There are whispers that maybe he's going to sit down with Gary Neville on his Overlap podcast, and
he's already written a letter to the Manchester United Supporters Trust, actually, hasn't he? And I read that today, and I thought it was quite a, as far as a first sort of salvo as to this is what we're going to plan to do, I thought it was quite good and very PR speak. We're here for long term. There's a lot of talk about long term. Even in the initial statement that they released on Christmas Eve, there was the idea of returning Manchester United to sport, the top of the sporting tree, and something that actually the Glazers did put in that statement as well. The fact that they've spent a lot of money over the course of the last 10 years, but that hasn't translated into sporting success. So that is why they've asked somebody else to take charge of this department and deal with it. Look, so Dave Brailsford was there last night. He has been part of the group that's been running Nice. Nice are second in League at this time. It hasn't been a smooth sailing process there either, but slowly but surely they've got to the point where they're in a good position now. This is a guy who obviously has a good reputation for his work they did with the British Olympic cycling team prior to that, and he's obviously well trusted by Sir Jim Ratcliffe. So, what should be on his to-do list first?
Well, he's going to get a seat on the board as well.
There's 2 seats on the board for INEOS, right?
Yeah, Jean-Claude Blanc, who we expect to come in as the CEO, is going to get the other seat. So that's another interesting aspect of this deal. In terms of the to-do list, I think what was interesting in that letter, actually, he almost pleaded for patience with the Manchester United fans. He said, yes, we want to get the club back to where we feel they belong, but it will take time. And you've mentioned it's taken time at Nice. So I don't think he's promising an overnight fix, because there are still FFP restrictions within which United have to operate. But I think the first part of the job is to clear out the deadwood, and there's still an awful lot of deadwood at that football club as far as I'm concerned. Trim the wage bill, because I think they've got players earning far too much money for what they're actually producing on the pitch. Try and build a squad and a first team with an identity, because I think that's been a big issue for Erik ten Hag. We don't really know what sort of team Manchester United are at this moment in time. The stadium does need redeveloping and bringing up to scratch. I think it's an embarrassment for Manchester United that Old Trafford wasn't even part of the bid for the European Championships that are going to be held in this country. It was once the most iconic venue in the land, and it isn't anymore. We mentioned the training ground needs some work. I think they need to reconnect as an ownership with the supporters, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe has promised more transparency, but we heard that from the Glazers after the Super League fallout, and they didn't deliver on that. So there's an awful lot to do, but I think key to it all is getting recruitment right, and that appointment of director of football, sporting director, I think that is going to be absolutely crucial.
Lots of rumours that Dan Ashworth will take that role. Is that a possibility?
I think it's a strong possibility.
Why would he want to leave Newcastle United to go and join a new project after only basically just joining a relatively new project?
Because I think there are a lot of different people at Newcastle who are wanting to have their say. Maybe Dan Ashworth would prefer if he could take more of a lead role. And I think it's a big opportunity, isn't it, at Manchester United? If you come in as sporting director and you're seen as the man to turn around this sinking ship.
Big if.
I think that would be a massive ego boost, if you like, and there's obviously a lot of ego in football, but he has that predated relationship as well, doesn't he, with Sir Dave Brailsford? I think he got him in to actually address the Newcastle players one pre-season. I think he spoke to INEOS as well about potentially taking up a role at Nice. Spoke to Sir Jim Ratcliffe. So I think he ticks a lot of boxes. You've got Paul Mitchell as well, once of Tottenham, Southampton and Monaco, a Mancunian back in the city, and I'm told that he's very keen to come in. And it might not be either or, because I think they're looking at a complete overhaul on that structure, and there could well be a director of football, a sporting director, Dan Ashworth, for example, and then someone like Paul Mitchell, Dougie Friedman, who comes in as head of recruitment. So it's going to be interesting to see how those positions are filled.
John Murtagh and Darren Fletcher, who are working in that department at this moment in time. John Murtagh, in particular, has been the football director, technical director, Darren Fletcher.
I think he'll go, John Murtagh. It probably would be a PR win to keep Darren Fletcher around, bit of a club legend. I think actually he does have a role to play. I think he's probably doing too many different jobs at this moment in time. I think he could do with streamlining and finding a definitive role. But, I mean, we read the piece that our colleagues at Athletic did last week. John Murtagh didn't come out of that particularly well. I'm told that he's well regarded in the game. He's respected by people in similar positions at other football clubs. He's seen as a good guy. But I think he's probably been promoted above his station.